Hello, welcome to the My School channel. My name is Angela, and in this video we're going to continue the government topic by topic video lesson. So we're going to continue with the topic political crisis in Nigeria, where we're going to continue discussing those various political crises that occurred in Nigeria. So we're going to begin with the Western Nigerian election crisis of 1965. We're also going to discuss the Nigerian Civil War, as well as so many other crises that occurred in post-independence Nigeria. So please stay with us, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to my school channel. Like I said earlier, this is the second part of the video lesson on political crisis in Nigeria. So now we're going to begin with the Western Nigerian election crisis of 1965. So let's dive right into it. So after Chief Obafemi Awolowo was jailed in 1963, his loyalists joined the United Progressive Grand Alliance (UPGA) coalition. So remember in the previous video lesson, we talked about how so many different political parties in Nigeria decided to form a coalition so that there will be two major coalitions that can compete for the various government offices in the country. So we had the NNA, the Nigerian National Alliance, and the UPGA, the United Progressive Grand Alliance. So while all of these things were going on the national stage, a lot of other things were going on in so many different regions in the country, especially in the Western region. So in the Western region, Chief Obafemi Awolowo's coalition joined UPGA. Remember, there was a power tussle between Samuel Ladoke Akintola and Chief Obafemi Awolowo. And those who belonged to Akintola's faction wanted to join the Northern People's Congress at that time. They wanted to align with the more conservative Northern People's Congress, while Obafemi Awolowo's faction were more progressive in nature and wanted to align with the NCNC and all other political parties that were in the southern region of the country. So with these two different alliances that was formed in 1964, the NNA and UPGA, the loyalists of Chief Obafemi Awolowo decided to join the UPGA coalition, while those of Samuel Ladoke Akintola joined the Nigerian National Alliance under the political party NNDP at that time. So by 1964, these two rival coalitions, UPGA and NNA, dominated Nigerian politics. So the rivalry at the federal level soon shifted base to Western Nigeria. This was because there was an election that was about to take place in 1965, a year after the federal election crisis of 1964. So the problems that arose at the national level was now shifted to the Western region at that time. And so this sets the stage for the 1965 regional elections. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the causes of the crisis. What are those things that caused this crisis? First of all, we have the UPGA versus NNA rivalry in the West. So in Western Nigeria, AG represented UPGA, while NNDP represented NNA. So it was that battle again between UPGA and NNA, but right now at the region. The elections were therefore more than regional. They were seen as a proxy battle between the two national coalitions. There was also the use of state power by NNDP. So before the elections, the ruling NNDP, this is the Nigerian National Democratic Party, which had Akintola as the premiership candidate. He won the election in the previous regional election. And so now that there is a new regional election, he wanted to use some of the state power to be able to control the narrative and the things that were going on at that time. So the ruling NNDP imposed a curfew and other stringent restrictions in parts of the region to cripple UPGA's campaign. So this gave NNDP an unfair advantage and further stoked resentments among the people. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, and that cause of the crisis is the electoral malpractices that were going on before and during the election. So at the dissolution of the Western House of Assembly, remember this is a parliamentary system of government, so before an election takes place, the House of Assembly is dissolved, whether at the national level or at the regional level. It is dissolved so that a new election can take place. So at the dissolution of the Western House of Assembly, the irregularities that had plagued the 1964 federal elections reappeared. UPGA candidates in many constituencies could not even collect nomination papers because electoral officers were absent. So in areas where UPGA managed to submit nominations, NNDP candidates were declared unopposed. So this is another means by which they crippled the activities of the United Progressive Grand Alliance within the region. So there was also a violent campaign atmosphere. The electioneering period was marked by hooliganism, killings, arson, and intimidation. So public trust in the fairness of the electoral process collapsed even before voting day, even before the election took place. They've already lost confidence in the electoral process. Now let's move on to the next slide. Right now we're going to discuss the escalation of the crisis. So on 11th October 1965, elections were held in an atmosphere of fear and chaos. There was widespread reports of burning of ballot boxes, abnormal vote counting, intimidation of voters. So official results declared NNDP winner with 88 out of the 98 seats. Remember, this is a parliamentary system, and so the set of people who get to form the government of the day is dependent on whether or not they get that majority seat in the House of Assembly. So given that the NNDP won 88 out of the 98 seats in the House of Assembly, they get to form the government of the day. The premier will be gotten from that political party. So in contrast, Obga leaders claimed that they had in fact won 68 seats, and DS Adegbenro, who was the premiership candidate for the United Progressive Grand Alliance, proclaimed himself the legitimate premier of Western Nigeria, even appointing 8 ministers. So he acted like he had won the election and decided to form his cabinet. So remember, ministers are the members of the cabinet. They together form the executive in that government. So this was what he was trying to do at that time. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so however, Akintola was sworn in as premier and Adegbenro was arrested. So usually when things like this happen, the person who incited this will be arrested because it feels like he is not a legitimate leader, so he has no rights forming a cabinet at that time. So this is the reason Adegbenro was arrested at the time. Adegbenro's arrest sparked violent demonstrations and a total breakdown of law and order across the region. Thousands of lives were lost. Properties and houses were burnt, and the crisis engulfed Ibadan, Lagos, and other major towns, which made Western region virtually ungovernable. So this is how crisis in the region escalated at that time. So the violence in the West provided a final justification for the January 15, 1966 coup. So this was one of the reasons the military decided to intervene in the political process in Nigeria. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we're going to discuss the Nigerian Civil War, which took place between 1967 and 1970. So this is after the military government took over from the civilian government in Nigeria. So the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, took place between July 6, 1967 and January 15, 1970. So it took place within the space of 2 to 3 years. So it was fought between the federal government of Nigeria and the secessionist state of Biafra, led by Colonel Odumegu Ojoko. So Colonel Odumegu Ojoko was the governor of the Eastern region at that time. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, we're going to discuss the causes of the war. So we've divided these causes into the remote causes and the immediate causes. So the remote causes are those things that happened a while ago, but still has influence on why the war took place. And then the immediate causes are those things that took place within the space of 1 year that directly led to the war. So some of the remote causes include ethnic and regional rivalries. So this has been going on for a very long time, even before independence. So Nigeria was divided into 3 major regions dominated by the Hausa Fulani in the north, the Yoruba in the west, and the Igbo in the east. And these groups often competed for political and economic dominance. So Nigeria was divided in a sense as a result of these ethnic and regional rivalries that was created by our colonial masters. Then there was also political crisis of the First Republic. So we talked about how there were a lot of crises: the census crisis, the federal election crisis, the Western region election crisis. So all of these crises also created that atmosphere of mistrust and instability within the society. Then there was widespread rigging, violence and corruption, which weakened faith in democratic institutions. So all of these two also contributed to the Nigerian Civil War, as we're going to see later on. Let's move on to the next slide. And that remote cause is military involvement in politics. So the January 1966 coup, led mainly by Igbo officers, created suspicion that the Igbo were seeking ethnic dominance. So the coup toppled the First Republic and killed prominent northern and western leaders. So the fact that the military got involved in politics also had an influence on the war. The military officials had weapons that they can use to wreak mayhem in the society. They can use to enforce their will on the people. The fact that they had to kill several northern and western leaders at that time was because the military had the necessary weapons to do so. So military involvement in politics also contributed to the Nigerian Civil War. Then there was the imposition of the unitary systems. General Aguiyi came to power and implemented the unitary form of government, which replaced the federal system with Decree No. 34 of 1966. So this also had an impact on the war. So many saw this shift from federalism to a unitary structure as a way of concentrating power solely in the hands of the Igbos. Remember that Nigeria is a heterogeneous society. We have multiple religions, multiple cultures, multiple ethnic groups, and so a unitary system was not suitable in such a case, because how are you going to determine who the leader should be and where the leader should come from? So in such a society, a unitary system of government is not suitable. A federal system of government is more appropriate, and this is the reason why we've always adopted the federal system of government. So when Aguiyi changed that system of government to the unitary system, many people saw this shift as a means by which the Igbos were able to dominate the entire country, and they were not okay with this. And so this also had an impact on the war that took place. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we're going to discuss the immediate causes of the war. What are those things that took place in the year that was leading up to the war? So it began with the January 1966 coup. So on January 15, 1966, Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogo and other officers staged the coup. Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, Premier Ahmadu Bello from the north, and Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola, the Premier of the West, they were all killed during that coup. General Jetsuya Aguiyi and Igbo took power as head of states, and his unification decree, which is Decree No. 34, abolished the federal system and replaced it with a unitary system of government, which Northerners saw as Igbo domination. So during this coup, a lot of Northern and Western leaders were killed, but the Eastern leaders were not killed at that time, and so people felt that because of the way the coup was perpetrated, that it was a sign that the Igbos were trying to dominate the entire country. So this was one of the immediate causes of the war. Then we also have the July 1966 counter coup. So northern officers staged a counter coup in which Ironsi and Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi were killed. So when Ironsi was visiting the governor of the Western region at that time, they staged the counter coup and killed the military head of state as well as the premier, as well as the governor of the Western region. The Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon became head of state at that time. So Yakubu Gowon was not really from any region at that time. They saw him as a Christian northerner. So he was able to, they felt that he was a symbol that could unify the entire country. And then when he came, he established that federal system of government again. So the way all of these things happened also was an immediate cause of the war. The fact that Yakubu Gowon, though he was a Christian northerner, was still a northerner, also directly contributed to the war, as we're going to see later on. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we're going to discuss the massacres of the Igbo in the north. This is another immediate cause of the war. So between May and September 1966, pogroms occurred in the north, where tens of thousands of Igbos were killed and millions fled back to the east. And this deepened ethnic animosity and created refugee crisis. So a lot of Igbos were killed in the north during this period as a result of that ethnic rivalry that was going on between the various regions in the country. So a lot of Igbos were killed, and so some of them had to flee back to the eastern region. And then after all of these things, Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu was the governor of the eastern region at that time, raised alarm about how a lot of Igbos were being killed at that time. And in order to come at an agreement as to how to resolve the ongoing tension that was going on in Nigeria, Gowon and Ojukwu met in Aburi, Ghana, and agreed on a loose confederation of regions. So Aburi, Ghana, Aburi is a place in Ghana. It's a place where Yakubu Gowon and Ojukwu went to discuss how to resolve that ongoing tension. It was presided over by the Ghanaian leader at that time. They tried to resolve some of the conflict that were going on. However, Gowon's government later reneged on the terms. After they've discussed the terms and they've all signed agreements during this Aburi Accord, when they eventually came back to Nigeria, Yakubu Gowon reneged on some of those agreements that he had signed earlier on. So as a result of that, Ojukwu declared the Eastern region the Independent Republic of Biafra on 30th May 1967. And so the federal government rejected the secession, and then the war began on July 6, 1967. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss the escalation of the war. So between July and October 1967, Nigerian troops attacked from the north, the west, and the Midwest. So in that sense, the entire eastern region was cornered from every side, from the northern region, from the western region, from the midwestern region. And so they were left to fend for themselves within the region and with no means of escape. So Biafran forces invaded the Midwest and advanced towards Lagos, but then again they were repelled by the federal troops. Then in 1968, federal troops captured major Biafran towns such as Port Harcourt, Enugu, Aba, Nsukka, and Calabar. Then Biafra was blockaded, leading to severe famine. So images of starving Biafran children drew international attention. So a lot of pictures about children who were suffering from malnutrition gained rounds across the world, and so many different international organizations and countries were commenting on the issues that were going on in Nigeria at that time. However, Biafra held on with their defense, and this led to a stalemate. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, in 1969, the federal forces launched a decisive offensive. So this was what eventually collapsed the Biafran forces. So by January 1970, Biafra collapsed. Ojukwu fled into exile, and his deputy, Philip Effiong, surrendered to the federal troops. So on January 15, 1970, Biafra officially surrendered to the federal government. Gowon declared the famous policy of no victor, no vanquished. And then the government launched a reconciliation, reconstruction, and rehabilitation, the 3 house programs to rebuild war-torn areas. At that time, the Biafran currency was introduced before the war. And so after the war, the currency was no longer valid, and they were trying to reintegrate them back into the Nigerian society. So this was the reason for this policy, the policy of reconciliation, reconstruction, and rehabilitation to reintegrate this seceded nation back into the Nigerian society. Now let's move on to the next slide. Now we're going to discuss the positive consequences of the war. What are the positive outcomes of the war? First of all, there was the preservation of Nigerian unity. The war prevented secession and kept Nigeria as one country. Then it also led to the creation of more states. So with Gowon's creation of 12 states, it reduced that regional monopoly of power and weakened ethnic domination. So now Nigeria was no longer divided across ethnic lines. They were now divided into states. And some of the states usually accommodated to many different ethnic groups. And so people no longer thought in terms of ethnicity. They were now thinking about how to develop the nation as a whole. Then there was the growth of the military. The war strengthened the Nigerian military institution and its role in governance. So it was during this period that Nigeria gained a lot of its weapons. They got a lot of international backing from countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, and France. And they used all of these things to strengthen their military, forces. Then another consequence of the war is the industrial and infrastructural development. So wartime self-reliance encouraged industrialization. For example, armaments production and refineries. So they had to produce all of these things because they needed the resources from this production to fuel the economy and also to fuel the war efforts. So it also contributed to the growth in the Nigerian industry and in the Nigerian infrastructure. Let's move on to the next slide. Now we're going to discuss the negative consequences of the war. What are those things that Nigeria has lost as a result of the Nigerian Civil War? First of all, there was a massive loss of lives. Between 1 to 3 million people died, mostly from starvation in Biafra. There was malnutrition. Most of the Biafrans could not get a reasonable source of protein because they were surrounded at all sides. So they did not have access to protein, and there was a lot of kwashiorkor and malnutrition at that time. So as a result of that, a lot of people, millions of people died. Then there was starvation as a weapon of war. So the Nigerian troops used starvation as a weapon The blockade on Biafra led to one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 20th century. So there was widespread famine and displacements that occurred during that time. So they used that starvation as a weapon. When people were hungry, they were no longer strong enough to fight the federal forces. And so this is one of the reasons the federal troops were able to gain an advantage over the Biafran troops. Then there was the displacement of families. Millions of people became refugees within and outside Nigeria, and families were torn apart. So this is another negative consequence of the war. There was also economic hardship. The war drained Nigeria's economy. It disrupted trade and agricultural production. Let's move on to the next slide. And that negative consequence of the war is the currency policy. So after the war, the Nigerian government introduced a new currency, rendering old Biafran notes useless. And this impoverished many Igbo families who lost their savings overnight. When they transitioned to the Biafran currency, and then after the war was over, they were not able to transition back into the Nigerian society because the notes that they already had became useless at that time. Then there was also the disruption in the education sector. Schools and universities in the East shut down for years, and this derailed the education of thousands of young people. Many students never recovered academically. And then there was also the increase in crime. The proliferation of arms during the war led to a post-war surge in violent crimes and armed robbery. So a lot of civilians got weapons. And so after the war, these weapons were not recovered from the civilians, and so they were able to use these weapons to perpetrate crime in the society. It's another direct consequence of the war. Now let's move on to the next slide. And that negative consequence is that Nigeria's image abroad was destroyed. So internationally, Nigeria was criticized for the humanitarian crisis, especially the starvation strategy. So the phrase Biafran children became a global symbol of war-induced famine. Then there was also psychological trauma. Survivors lived with deep scars of violence, hunger, and displacements, which affected the national cohesion for decades. So we've come to the end of this segment of the video lesson. I believe it was informative and insightful. If you would like to continue on this journey with us, please go down to the link in the description below. This takes you to my school website where you can subscribe for the government topic by topic video lesson. There you can continue on this journey with us. We're going to move on to other election crises that took place in Nigeria's post-independence era. We'll talk about the election crisis of 1979, the one of 1983, and the one of 1993. So I hope to see you there. I believe you're enjoying this content. If yes, please don't forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly, tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release the next videos.